Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, we're one Supreme Court justice away from tossing out abortion rights, even for rape and incest, if Sarah Palin has her way. We chat with Risa Shaw about her book on sibling incest. Peak oil is here, and we're not ready, says author Edwin Black, but he's got the plan to get us to a post-fossil fuel economy. Offshore drills or offshore mills? Will it be oil or wind? Jim Lanard's company is set to develop an offshore wind farm near the Delaware, Maryland coastline. Also, a new documentary takes an historical view of the liberal-conservative divide.
The idea that workers didn't just have the right, but in many ways needed to have labor unions to protect them, to protect democracy at work. These are historic advances, and I think in that sense, the 1930s was a golden era of liberalism.
Reuben Jackson reviews a compilation of writings by late peace activist Rachel Corrie. Poet Angie Chuang takes us on a trip to Vietnam, and we've got the unique sounds of Iliami on the Coffee House. Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. The best estimates are that over 3,000 pregnancies a year in the U.S. result from rapes, and about half of the victims are minors. We also know that about 1 out of 15 girls between grades 5 and 8 is sexually abused, and over 1/3 of their attackers is a family member. GOP vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin declares, quote, "No matter what mistakes we make as a society, we cannot condone ending an innocent's life." Palin, a conservative Christian, opposes abortion rights even in cases of rape or incest, as does her party. Astonishing. What God worthy of worship and what government worthy of loyalty would require a 12-year-old violent incest victim to carry her attacker's baby to term? Author Margaret Randall calls incest the primary betrayal, a violation that makes it painfully difficult, sometimes impossible, to trust again. Incest comes in many shapes and sizes. Father-daughter is common, but so too is sibling incest, the subject of Not Child's Play, compiled and edited by Risa Shaw. We spoke to her in 2001 about her book. The title, Not Child's Play. Tell us about it.
It comes from a line in the introduction which I wrote, and it follows a section in which I talk about how sexual abuse between children is usually dismissed, how it's often minimized and delegitimized, and how it's excused, how parents and other adults often say that boys will be boys, that those sorts of things don't happen in my house, and my kids would never do that. And then I talk about also how the brothers always were aware of every creak in the stairs, or the way that the trees moved in outside of the barn, or wherever it was that they were doing what they were doing with their sisters, and how the brothers always were very careful about what they did. And so it wasn't just boys will be boys.
But how do you draw the line between what many people would consider to be normal, even healthy sexual curiosity or experimentation and molestation?
I think that there's clearly a difference. And the 35 women in the book, it's very clear from the stories that they tell. Adolescent sexual exploration is just that. It's not full of coercion and power plays and domination. It's not full of threats and ultimatums and promises made by the brothers, which is what the sibling incest is full of.
Yeah, we're talking about incest, and frankly, from my perspective, incest between consenting adults is their business, but we're not talking about consensual sexual relations here.
No, we're not.
We're not talking about adults.
We're not talking about adults. We're talking about children, and the stories in the book range, the girls were anywhere from 2 to 20. They talk about the incidences happening anywhere from a couple of times to, I think that there's one where there's a span of 12 years, and the brother was well into his 20s by the time the girl finally had it stopped. So we're not talking about adults, and we're not talking about people who are consenting.
Is there something different on in the effect on the victim of sibling sexual abuse than sexual abuse by some third party?
Well, I think that the fact that it happens in the family is one layer, and that another layer is that it's a sibling, that it's supposed to be a trusted comrade, that it's supposed to be someone who you can rely on. And invariably it's the older sibling who's the abuser. So you're also looking at someone who is supposed to provide guidance and protection and is providing exactly the opposite.
This is the
violating.
primal betrayal that Margaret Randall talked about in the foreword to your book. Yeah.
Exactly. They're violating you, they're betraying you in every way you could think of.
What motivated you to write this book?
I'm a survivor myself, and I went looking for the book 22 years ago. There were books out at that time on incest, and brother-sister incest was sometimes mentioned, paragraph, even just, a bit here or there, but there was nothing where I heard the other women who knew this same horror speak about what I knew and what had happened to me. And it never came about, and so I created it myself.
And this creation is a series of memoirs, it's poetry, it's some fiction, and it's artwork. Tell me about how you conceived of this collection.
Basically, I did what I wanted to have for myself. I wanted to see a variety of expressions of people's experiences, of what they've gone through, how they've worked through things, what they hoped for. And I knew that I wanted the art in it because there's a lot that you can't say verbally, and there's a lot that you can't touch on a verbal level either. And so I knew I wanted art as well as writing, and I put out a call for contributions.
But you published this yourself.
I did. No one would pick it up. I started the collection about 12 years ago. And it started with, I told a friend of a friend that I was thinking about doing it because I wanted such a volume. And the next thing I know, a friend of hers had sent me a piece, which is actually in the book. And that was before I really decided I was going to do it. And I sent proposals out to publishers several times, probably to well over 60 or 70 publishers, and decided at one point that on my last try that if no one picked it up, that I would go ahead and do it myself because I didn't want it to be kept silent any longer.
What do we know about the abusers, the victims? Are there things that are common in sibling sexual abuse cases?
I can speak from my own experience and the experience of the women in the book and the people who have written to me. And I think that one of the most common things is not only the power dynamics between the siblings, but also the power dynamics in the entire family and how those get handed down to the siblings.
And when you say power dynamics, explain.
I'm talking about control behaviors, control patterns, coercion, domination, manipulation.
Is it always a question of power and domination?
I believe so.
But sometimes it appears, at least on the face, to be consensual. That is, there is a desire on the part of the sister to curry favor of an older brother, for instance.
I think it probably appears to be the sister gets special attention that she wouldn't get otherwise. And we know that kids do all sorts of things for whatever they can get in different ways. I think that that does not in any way make it consensual, mitigate any of the coercion that's going on.
And where are the parents in this situation?
That's a good question. It's a very good question. I've heard stories of parents who have basically said to the kids, just be quiet, just, go in your room, shut the door, stop being so noisy, to parents who just turn the other cheek, who say they didn't know that anything was going on, but maybe they noticed some difference in behavior between the kids, but never did anything about it.
Based upon your own experience and that of the other women reflected in this book, is it the case that the girls never went to their parents also?
No. I've got one story in the book, and it's actually the only one that I've heard, where the girl, when she was 6 or 7, there was a huge family gathering, and she stood up in the middle of the celebrations and said, "By the way, this is what my brother's doing to me." And she says there was shocked silence, and it never happened again. Her brother never touched her again. And still, 34 years later, no one has ever mentioned it again in her family.
A lot of people, I think, imagine that it's a very different situation between a natural brother and sister and perhaps a stepbrother and sister. Is it different?
I don't think so.
Difference.
I can't give you statistics,
Yeah,
but I do know from the people I've talked to, and again, the stories in the book, that there are stories of step-siblings and there are stories of siblings that are not step.
And then the other thing that seems to be a factor is the likelihood that the abuser is also an abused. Is that right?
It's often the case. There's also, in my experience, many times the abuser says no. They have no memory of being abused. They don't think they were. So often it does happen that way, and sometimes I don't know.
Are there typical stages in the process of sexual abuse of a sibling in terms of, for instance, at first fear of response, and then some major kind of outpouring of memory and emotion, and then some effort to deal with it? How does it work?
I know that there's that the incest, the abuse, leaves the girls and the women with huge amounts of shame, a lot of self-blame. They often feel complicit in the abuse in some way because they didn't get someone to notice that it was going on or get any help. There's a lot of anger, but it's usually directed towards the self, and which just makes for a mess. And so I know that those sorts of things happen. I think that there's a lot of fear on the kid's part of telling somebody and not being believed or being blamed for it, and then all of those things get carried through into adulthood.
And so what is the healing process, if there is one?
Well, I think speaking out makes a huge difference. I think whether it's as a little girl, you tell somebody who's safe, and I would encourage any girl to do that. Or whether it's as a woman and you tell one person and then maybe you write about it. I think that as much as you can speak out about it, as privately or publicly as that might happen for you, that's what creates movement, that's what creates action.
That was Risa Shaw, editor of Not Child's Play. We spoke with her in 2001, and yes, that was me about 8 years ago. Incest and abuse may never be wholly vanquished, but by speaking up, we take it out of the shadows. Sarah Palin notwithstanding, the last thing we should do is further punish incest victims by forcing them into birthing and motherhood. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
Modern liberalism began as a protest against the so-called robber barons, the industrialists, bankers, financiers, the Andrew Carnegies and J.P. Morgans and John D. Rockefellers, who were perceived as revolutionizing American society, and revolutionizing it not in a positive sense, in dividing the rich from the poor, in controlling government for their own interests. The whole language of the special interests against the popular interests, which is so much a part of our political language today, really gets started in a mass sense in the Gilded Age.
Up until William Jennings Bryan, the Democratic Party was basically libertarian. It stood for personal freedom and low taxes and free markets, particularly free trade. And the Republican Party was pretty statist. It stood for a sort of religious conservatism and protectionism and nanny state intervention.
In some ways, even under McKinley, but under Teddy Roosevelt, they became the Progressive Party. And a Republican-led progressivism played the major role in transforming the United States and helping it to move into the 20th century in a successful way.
The Panama Canal was started. Pure food legislation passed. Conservation furthered. The dynamic old Rough Rider steered the ship of state with a resolute, forceful hand.
A new liberalism came along in the 1930s because of Franklin Delano Roosevelt building on the progressive tradition and the idea of not limited government but activist government.
In our efforts for recovery, we have avoided on the one hand the theory that business should and must be taken over into an all-embracing government. We have avoided on the other hand the equally untenable theory that it is an interference with liberty to offer reasonable help when private enterprise is in need.
The idea that the government should help Americans in trouble, the idea that taxes should be raised on the richer Americans in order to do that, the idea that workers didn't just have the right, but in many ways needed to have labor unions to protect them, to protect democracy at work. These are historic advances, and I think in that sense, the 1930s was a golden era of liberalism, certainly. And of course, those who called themselves liberals were more popular and won elections more easily than they ever had before or since.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. With global warming rising fast, former Vice President Al Gore recently challenged the nation to achieve 100% quote-unquote carbon-free electricity within 10 short years. One Delaware-based company in June took a huge step in that direction by announcing that it had secured arrangements to build America's very first large-scale offshore wind farm. The wind farm will feature at least 78 towering windmills located about 10 miles off the Delaware coastline, just north of the border with Maryland. The project is expected to provide clean electricity for at least 130,000 homes. A second wind farm is now being considered for the Maryland coastline. But will the Delaware wind farm raise electricity rates? Will it be a visual nuisance to beachgoers? And what about the potential damage from the rising occurrence of Atlantic hurricanes and their impact on wind farms? Here to discuss details of America's historic, first-of-its-kind wind farm is Jim Lanard, Head of Strategic Planning for Bluewater Wind, LLC. Jim, welcome to the Coffee House.
Mike, thanks for having me.
Let's begin. I mean, most Americans, all they've heard in terms of offshore wind power is this wind farm up in Massachusetts in Nantucket Sound, the Cape Wind Project. And they've heard mostly that people are opposed, some of the wealthy landowners, and there's this controversy and this opposition. The Delaware wind farm, it's going to get built. It's probably going to be the first one built. Construction starts in about 2 years. Who supports it? Who's supporting this? How is this happening?
Well, we have a lot of support. The Delaware Audubon Society, the Sierra Club, the Delaware Nature Society, virtually every elected official, U.S. Senator Tom Carper, U.S. Senator Joe Biden, Mike Castle, the U.S. Representative in the House, and all statewide elected officials have really gotten behind us, and the citizens are what brought us over the top to get us to victory.
And I've read also that the tourism representatives feel that this could be a tourism opportunity. How so?
People are going to want to charter boats to go out to see the wind farm because they're not going to see it from shore. They'll see something that looks about half the size of one's thumbnail and as thin as a toothpick. But to go out there and to see these majestic turbines spinning is really something else.
Chamber of Commerce in the area, they support it?
The Hotel Motel Association, the Chamber down there, all the different business groups are behind this.
Well, why would the Audubon Society support this wind farm? You know, we hear some people say that wind farms are bad for birds and bats, but here you have an organization dedicated to protecting birds supporting an offshore wind farm. Why?
Sure. Well, first of all, they are worried about global warming and climate change. because that will affect the species and the habitat for species. But more importantly, Bluewater's hallmark is that we go far offshore, and we believe that takes us out of the migratory flyways for the birds that are traveling north and south during the different seasons. We'll be monitoring that for 2 years to make sure we're right about that, but right now we're very confident that we will avoid bird strikes there.
And the visual impact, I know you said about half the size of a thumbnail when you hold it out. So these are from the beach. So these are going to look very, very small, even though they're pretty large structures. They're going to look pretty small from the shoreline.
And you're talking on a clear winter day. In the summer with the haze, on about 30% of the days you won't see them at all, and the other days it will be very hard to see them.
So at least about 78 of these wind turbines. Describe them. I mean, what's the scale?
Sure.
3 megawatt wind turbines. What does that mean?
Well, what that means is you have about 262 feet of a tower, and on top of it is a nacelle, or a box where the gears are, and a rotor with 3 blades. The blades are long. They're about 140 feet long. They're about half the length of a football field.
And what about the cost to ratepayers? Because there are many people who say, well, renewable power is great, we just can't afford it, and it's a luxury. What will be the presumed cost to ratepayers?
We had a competition to be selected for this project. We beat a coal plant and a gas plant, and the state was evaluating that with an independent consultant. Their conclusion is that our price will be 70 cents a month per customer over the market price now. But if the gas, coal, oil prices go up like they have in the last year, we'll be saving customers money from day one.
So an offshore wind farm would actually be saving consumers money, assuming that oil, gas, and coal continue to rise in cost.
And there's a very good expectation that with China demanding so much coal and us shipping it from the United States over there, the prices are going up, and therefore we think that we can save money very early, if not on day one.
So if this is the case, limited visual impacts, studies showing that these won't have impacts on bird populations, and it could save consumers money. What in the world has been holding this back? I mean, it sounds too good to be true. What's been the holdup to this point, and where do we go from here after this wind farm's built, in your view?
There are 28 offshore wind parks in Europe operating, and they're operating, some of them, since 1991. The United States is just behind. The policymakers, the decision makers, the regulators have been behind. They're now catching up. There is great interest at the federal and state level to move these projects forward. So we're seeing a lot of good public policy going forward now, and we will see multiple wind parks in the near future.
Well, let's talk about that, because we have this wind farm off the coast of Rehoboth in Delaware. This is relatively shallow water. You can't put them in 5-mile deep water. It's about 70, 80 feet
That's
depth.
right, exactly.
And this, so the vision is ultimately that this wind farm would come down to the Maryland coast as well. Number one, when do you expect the blades to be turning in Delaware, and when might they turn in Maryland as well?
Sure. Well, first we're going to start spinning our turbines in Delaware in 2012. We could start building and operating a wind park in Maryland 1 year later. I will tell you that Governor O'Malley has been tremendously supportive of this, and we're really happy to have his support, and we're working with his administration to develop policies that would support a wind park off of Ocean City, about 12 miles off.
So similar distance, similar features, very small visually in the distance for the Maryland park. Now, there have been those who say we have to jumpstart the renewable energy industry. We have to reach that takeoff point. You give it a little push. It's sort of like automobiles in 100 years ago. With a offshore wind park in Delaware and another one in Maryland, do you think this is going to finally jumpstart the offshore and onshore wind industry? Is this enough to get going?
I'm afraid to use this analogy, but I think we are going to see a domino effect here, where after 2 or 3 wind parks, people are going to be clamoring for them. They're going to see that they work well. Our fuel is free, so we never have to worry about fuel increases. It's a stable priced, clean, renewable resource that we're bringing at a time when the coasts are being threatened by climate change and sea level rise.
So walk us through again, or in more detail, how you actually build one of these.
Sure.
I mean, they really are impressive structures. Give us the dimensions above the water, in the water, and below the seafloor.
Well, specialized vessels that have to be specially built for this type of construction and installation are made, And we go out to the site, and the first thing we do is we put in a foundation that goes about 90 feet below the seabed floor. It's all steel. We then have the foundation continues through the water, about 75 feet of water, and then it gets connected to the turbine itself with a transition piece. That turbine itself is about 80 meters or 262 feet, goes up, and then we have the turbine blades up there spinning.
Amazing. Now, there's been a lot of talk of offshore oil drilling and how some people in this country want to see more of it. There have been others who've said not only would that not help with gas prices because there's not that much out there, but as we see more and more hurricanes, seems like one a week almost in the American Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic coast. As we see more hurricanes, why wouldn't these same hurricanes affect offshore wind in terms of potential damage like offshore drilling? What would this wind farm do if a hurricane hit?
Well, first we're building them to a Category 3 hurricane, which is stronger than any Category 3. No hurricane that strong has hit the Delaware coast. But we do take other precautions. From land, we can operate each of the turbines remotely. The first thing we do is we feather the blades so that we stop the aerodynamics of the blade. Next,
So you sort of turn the blade against, so it's not catching the wind,
that's right.
It's letting the wind pass?
Very similar to airplane wings, how they change the dynamics depending on where they are, whether they're landing or taking off, braking. Then we turn the blade. So if the wind were coming like this, we would turn the blade parallel to the wind. We would take it out of gear and we would put on a brake. And we will sit there and we will watch the wind speeds. And as soon as they get below 55 miles an hour again, we reverse the process as quickly as we can because we really like that good speed, and we put them up and we turn out the electricity.
So you can literally by computer like batten down the hatches for these giant windmills offshore. And then you're saying 55 miles an hour, up to 50, these things can capture tropical storm force winds.
Bring it on. The average speed that we like before we'll build someplace is around 18 miles an hour, but we'll take up to 54, 55 miles an hour. And we'll put a lot of electricity into the grid, a lot of clean electricity for homes.
But is this really just anecdotal? Okay, that's great. We've got a few windmills out there we can show our kids on vacation. Or is this something serious in terms of our national grid? What is the potential for wind power? What percentage of our wind power could offshore and land-based wind farm actually provide in this country in total?
Well, the grid could handle about 20% of electricity from wind. Just to give you a perspective on the wind resources in the ocean, our facility in Delaware will likely be about 450 megawatts. That will serve 130,000 homes. The U.S. Department of Energy estimates that there's 30,000 megawatts of wind energy out in the ocean, and we will go further out. We'll capture that wind with new technology, the round 2 and round 3 generations of offshore wind park, and really serve this country and allow us to reduce our dependency on foreign oil.
And just briefly, there's even talk of like floating wind turbines out there, or they'd be tethered to the ground instead of drilling in. They would actually be out there just sort of floating in the water.
They're being tested now. We think they're 5, 10, maybe 15 years off, but they'll be there and we'll be ready to build them.
That's amazing. Well, a big thanks to Jim Lanard of the Bluewater Wind Company. If America's going to meet Al Gore's challenge of a clean electricity grid within 10 years and thus beat back global warming, it's clear offshore wind power will play a very big role. I'm Mike Tidwell.
Latitude 1045 north. At midday, air congeals to salty broth. It spills and throbs, seeping onto black asphalt. The sun stays low on its track as streets hum the urban locust's one-note cry. The day oozes across the corrugated glare of tin-roof shacks, exposes only its curved back, exudes inquisitions like exhaust. Mapped on a globe, this latitude hovers over the Earth's bulging middle. But I say, forget geography. Here, the unknown distance between war and now uncovers what's real. The hookers sweat and widows pray as a cyclo driver grinds down the noon. 2. Directions to Fantiet. Take Highway 1 due east until you reach the sea. You'll know you're getting close when you smell the ferric brine. It coats the very air. Black tides of fish sleek and glistening ferment a rich stew. The beach comes into sight as you wind past rows of rope-muscled men, nets in tow. You'll see a city against denuded peaks. Choose any road you like into town. All lead to the same destination. The ways we drown in salt-encrusted sieves, writhing against the net. Here lie the souls of patch walls. Proceed past the unspoken, past the cratered ground, where the bomb's ghosts dwell, the fish gasp, blood wet. 3. Fulam Nail Factory. Steely ropes coil like deflated springs. Clockwork bursts sound out the birth of each nail, separated from the string of continuous metal, a terse declaration of industry, a verse in the hammering ballad of this village's pale, dusty earth. It meets the foul, black river, becomes mud. A wheelbarrow pushed by an invalid. He limps and grins, one blue-rimmed eye, another opaque brown, in echoing thuds, in wheelbarrows full of nails, karma lies. One man's life, a debt paid, always more nails to be made.
Hi, and welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. As the partisan clamor grows to drill, baby, drill, other voices are cautioning, where does that get us? Yes, we all want energy independence, but our guest says he has the plan. He's Edwin Black. Welcome, Edwin, back to the Coffee House.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I think this is what my
fifth visit.
Fifth visit.
That's a record.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I always come to the Coffee House first before embarking upon a national tour.
And tell me about this book and why you're going on a national tour.
Well, this is an important book, and it's not about energy independence, and it's not about doing the right thing. This is a book called The Plan, How to Rescue Society Once the Oil Stops. This country has no plan in the event of an emergency oil stoppage.
Well, before we get there, why would the oil stop?
Well, we use approximately 20 to 22 million barrels of oil per day in this country. About 60 to 70% of it is imported. If we lose just 5% of that supply, about 1 million barrels, which is what happened after Katrina, they will open up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is really just 6 to 8 weeks of unrefined oil. If we lose 1.5 million barrels, it is 7.5%. We'll have to call upon our allies in Poland and in South Korea and elsewhere around the world to open their strategic petroleum reserves. But if we lose 2 million barrels a day, just 10%, the loss will be so devastating to American society. We will have so many food shortages, such economic collapse, such lack of mobility that the government says they can't even model it. We will descend into chaos.
Well, why would we lose 10% of our oil
Well, you're
supply?
not going to lose it because of a hurricane in the Gulf, because we can fix that. You're not going to lose it because of a pinprick demolition by terrorists in Nigeria at a pipeline. But there is one place we can lose it, in the apocalyptic triangle at the Strait of Hormuz. There is a processing plant called
Strait of Hormuz, remind us, where is that?
The Strait of Hormuz is two 2-mile wide sea lanes where all the Persian Gulf oil from Iraq, from Iran, from the Gulf states, and from Saudi Arabia must pass.
And how much of the oil that we use passes through the Strait of Hormuz?
It would reduce, if the Strait of Hormuz was blocked, it would stop 40% of the seaborne oil, 11% of the global supply, and might stop 11 to 12% of American oil, depending upon what we can do. And that's just the beginning of it. If it's a protracted disruption caused by terrorism, 747s crashing into the Strait of Hormuz, or the Abqaiq oil processing plant, or the Ras-Tanura terminal, these 3 points in the isosceles triangle that can bring our nation to a halt and all Western civilization, this country will descend into chaos. And no one is asking about what we can do. We have no plan. Republicans have no plan. Washington has no plan. Democrats have no plan.
But we've been talking since the Carter administration about achieving energy independence. That is, making ourselves less vulnerable to those kinds of more than blips on the international oil market. Where are we in that process?
We've actually been discussing strategic petroleum reserves and oil and energy independence for about a century. In fact, the SPR itself, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, is over 100 years in the making, and it just became topped off. And it was designed for the Arab oil embargo of 1973. It's a different world today. Today there are 84 to 85 million barrels a day demanded, and about 500,000 barrels a day above that. So it's very, very tight. When demand drops, the OPEC exporters drop production. When it increases, they increase just ever so slightly. This is not a matter of energy independence. This is a matter of knowing there are hurricanes coming and no evacuation route, no contingency planning. Now, ironically...
But you said before that this isn't about another Katrina, that the real danger isn't about a hurricane. The real danger is that the Straits of Hormuz get blocked. They get
blocked.
What
I'm talking about is a terrorist hurricane, not a real hurricane. I'm talking about a looming danger that is being threatened and promised every day. If Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, or if Al-Qaeda does, and Venezuela joins in, and China participates, this country will come to a grinding halt.
All right, so shouldn't we then be drill, baby, drill? I mean, isn't that the solution to this?
No, because drill, baby, drill is a 5 to 10 year operation that will cost billions and billions of dollars. Here are the terrible realities. There are 250 million cars, gas-guzzling vehicles on America's roads today. So if you introduce 1 million electric cars a month, after a year, you still have 250 million gas-guzzling cars. On top of that, Detroit is adding 1.5 million gas-guzzling cars every month. So you're really bailing on the Titanic. There's an organization called the IEA, the International Energy Agency, which is a group of 28 nations that have banded together to protect themselves jointly in the event of an oil stoppage.
How?
They have an international protocol of contingency plans, demand restraint, oil switching, speed reductions, public transit, etc. The United States is the only country that has signed on to that treaty that has done no contingency planning. All of these nations have, in emergency law, a contingency plan. We have none. Our plan is to economically hijack a tanker in the middle of the ocean and bribe the owners to divert the oil to the United States. That is our only plan.
All right. What should the plan be?
We will need demand restraint. We will have to ground vehicles. In my plan, which is similar to plans that have been used throughout the world, all vehicles that have a city mileage rating of under 15 miles per gallon, that's Escalades, that's Bentleys, that's the Honda Pilot, which is 16 miles per gallon, those will be grounded permanently until they're retrofitted or upfitted with alternative fuels or alternative propulsion systems, whether that's second generation biofuel, hydrogen, CNG, electric, recycled French fry oil. There's lots and lots. In my plan...
All right, your plan is to make sure that we have enough oil on hand. And what you're prepared to do is say that 15 miles per gallon is some kind of cutoff. Why don't we try to solve two problems at once here? Why are we reliant on oil at all? Why don't we just do a massive conversion?
But actually, that's not it. I didn't say we need to be oil reliant. We need to get off of oil altogether. And we get off
But
of
you're
oil.
prepared to accept cars at over 15 miles per gallon.
Yes, just for a short period of time until they're retrofitted.
All right.
And I want them retrofitted. The problem is we only have 4 or 5 CNG retrofitting companies in the United States. Right now in Utah, there's an underground retrofitting movement trying to convert to CNG, which is 65 cents per gallon. So we will have to retrofit our cars to get off of oil. It's important to understand that
Well, why don't we do this instead? I mean, I hear where you're coming from, and I buy into the notion that we have to change our fleet. But why don't we do this? Why don't we just say, henceforth, no car can be marketed regardless of its class if it doesn't have a certain kind of fuel efficiency way above what we're currently requiring, and those cars have to be clean-burning cars. And
well,
then
we do say that,
and
but
then we
it's slightly
replace.
different. It's slightly different. I'm not in favor of mileage standards for new cars. I think it's a waste of time. I want to have cars that are off of oil, that use sugarcane ethanols, second generation biofuels, CNG, everything but oil, methanols. I'm interested in Detroit not giving us 1.5 million vehicles a month of gas guzzlers. I'm interested in Detroit giving us alt fuel, flex fuel, alternative production. And who's going to do it? It's not going to be Honda. They are suppressing this technology. It's going to be GM, the worst car company in the history of the United States, facing bankruptcy, has turned themselves around. And in 2010 November, they're going to produce hundreds of thousands of extended range electric cars.
And is this going to save us from the terrorism hurricane cataclysm?
Not at all. Because even if we start today to rescue ourselves, the terrible news is it would take a decade. You see, the scrappage rate.
All right, now we only have a few seconds left, so if there is any good news here, I want to hear it right now.
The good news is, this is a detailed, frustrating, painful plan. If we wait until the disaster occurs, we will never make it. If we start now, if we start our planning now, there's a chance that America can survive the pain of an oil stoppage that is certain to come our way.
I'm afraid we've run out of another precious commodity, time. Many thanks to the Plan author Edwin Black for joining us. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
Rachel Corrie was a young peace activist from Washington State who was killed in the Gaza Strip in March of 2003. She was also, in the words of actor Alan Rickman, a born writer. Let Me Stand Alone, the recently published collection of Corrie's journals, vividly supports Rickman's assessment, and then some. Even if you read or saw the controversial play My Name is Rachel Corrie, the depth and range of material found within Let Me Stand Alone will surprise you. Corrie's alternately wry, poignant, and always arresting vignettes on everything from post-adolescent heartbreak, nocturnal drives on a summer night, and, toward the end of the volume, sobering observations on life in the Gaza Strip, never fail to hold the reader's attention. Corrie's love for language and life are infectious. It's one thing to feel, but quite another to translate experience into something we as readers can understand. The same can be said for her drawings, which provide the reader with yet another example of this young woman's depth and artistic range. Readers familiar with Corrie's life, death, and legacy probably will undoubtedly read Let Me Stand Alone. But you don't have to know anything about the author to be moved by the title's rich ruminations. As another author, Franz Kafka, once wrote, they serve as an axe for the frozen sea inside us. For Writer's Block, I'm Reuben Jackson.
snow came fast. After all the lies and tired skies, she sent poetry and ice, and all the while it blocks the roads and drives me crazy. Not fast enough. Slip and skid and sit and fall. And taste me in your mouth, don't think too much. It'll drive you crazy. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. Snow will snap and vanish, and sleet upon the flame. You know we're reflex and we're passion, though we're trying to stay away. And how much will all this burn me? When you're tired of your games, you drive me crazy. So lay down all your arms and show those marks upon your back. Lay down, cross your arms and hide your scars from me and laugh. We're shoving static at each other or mutilating facts. But the weather looks so good when you pass. Wait, just wait, and keep your home from me. I'd burn it down for the noise and all its beauty, just to see if you're beautiful when angry. I think you are. Give me time, and I'll be leaving in the sun when the roads are clear. It's so easy to pretend I never feared you, and I'll lie and say we're fine. Give me space. It's not a complicated question. I've dumped money in this engine. Drain upon your fire, let it burn. Let them say it's crazy. Wait, please wait, and leave your home for me. We'll burn it down for the noise and all its beauty. Burn it down, 'cause you're beautiful when angry. I think you are, but I'd drive you crazy. Wait, please wait, and leave your home for me. We'll burn it down for the noise and all its beauty. Burn it down, 'cause you're beautiful when angry. I think you are. Whoa. Whoa.
Wow. It's tough to jump up and go into interview mode after something like that.
Thank you.
That's quite a piece.
Thank you very much.
It's pretty amazing. Welcome to the Coffee House, Rob, Heather, Rowan. You know, I just listening to the diversity of the songs you're doing, you know, going from very frenetic to, you know, very ballad, very...
Well, I think a lot of bands,
Yeah.
and especially in the musical community that we're running in now, a lot of bands are sort of set out with the idea of, I'm going to make my metal band, I'm going to make my folk
Right.
band, et
Get
cetera,
into
et
a
cetera.
genre, stay there.
Whereas I
Right.
think this very much sprung out of, I mean, I went to an art school, and this really came out of almost the thinking of an art project and the extension of artwork and expression
Yeah.
of self through that. This is a massive life project.
And frankly, each of us comes from a musical background that is vastly different.
Yeah.
Rowan has an intense, you know, Celtic background. Rob has an intense metal background. I come from much more of like a pop folk kind of sensibility. And so,
respecting the different...
yeah, we've all rubbed
It's
off
a
on
tapestry.
each other.
Yeah.
Shockingly so, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I was gonna mention, it's all coming back now, is life on the road. Like,
Yes,
you
Rob
said
and
you
I are-
had some weird gigs.
We had been told, beautiful waterfront bar in Myrtle Beach, you know. You can't miss it. It's right in front of the old Suck Bang Blow.
Oh, the Suck Bang Blow.
The Suck Bang Blow.
Which later we found out is not like a dirty thing. It is what happens when a motorcycle, it sucks the air in, it bangs, and it blows the air out. That's what it is. We roll up, and our lovely waterfront bar is in fact a flatbed truck with the tires let out in front of a school bus with Suck Bang Blow scrawled on it, where girls I can only hope were above the age of 18 in chaps and bikinis were selling
throwing
Budweiser.
Not selling. They were
Throwing.
like chucking them at people's heads.
And there were cage dancers, women who should never cage dance.
We had to shut down the show every once in a while because they jumped bikes over the stage.
Wait a minute.
It
you
was an
said
acoustic
jumped
stage
bikes
at Biker
over
Week.
the stage.
Yeah, yeah. It was
As
awesome.
in...
It was great.
As in the, yes, motorcycles, gigantic motorcycles.
Yeah.
Chrome and leather and
Right.
everything flying.
So that's the kind of thing you wouldn't mind being there, but if you had to try and perform in the middle of that, it could be a little bit
It
unnerving.
actually went really, really well.
Yeah.
All right, what are you going to take us out with?
A song that's actually going to go on the new CD.
Does the new CD have a title?
New CD is as of yet untitled, but the song has a title, and the song is Can You Love a Girl Gone So Long?
Okay, take it away, gang.
Thanks, Dave.
Fell for a girl, but for one lust first. Devil and spirits, the lesson he lives. Makes it holy sweet and makes it hard, hold on. But can you love a girl gone so long? Can you love a girl gone so long? She got a soft shore, she got a hard eye. She struck her on the side of the broken white line. Seems like it was the backseat home in your arms. Can you love a girl gone so long? Can you love a girl gone so long? You're man enough to miss her. Say true, you can't kiss her for another 3 weeks on the road. Waiting at the gate with a love so strong makes her wanna stay. Oh, she knows, gotta be moving on. Can you love a girl gone so long? Won't come home every night, but when she does, she'll warm your heart, she'll quicken your blood. Sails from skies and knows where she belongs. Can you love a girl gone so long? Can you love a girl gone so long? To her all she'll change her routes. Her alley over will lay you out. Yeah, be quick, confess that you were wrong. You can love a girl gone so long. You can love a girl gone so long. Are you man enough to miss her? Say true, you can't kiss her for another 3 weeks on the road. Waiting at the gate with a love so strong makes her wanna stay. No, she knows, gotta be moving on. Can you love a girl gone so long? Oh, love a girl gone so long? Can you love a girl gone so long? Can you love a girl gone so long? Can you love a girl? Can you love a girl? Can you love a girl?